Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has more details in regards to how much financial help Canadians will be receiving to offset the cost of living. The results of a new Leger poll are out, which reveals which party would win if an Alberta election took place today. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson has the details. And the Lethbridge Hurricanes are gearing up for the regular season. We hear from a coach and some players of what we can expect from the club this season.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau offered more details of a package which will aid in the high cost of living. Ottawa will temporarily double the GST rebate checks, send a $500 rental allowance, pay for dental care for kids under 12, and offer help to low to modest income families.
These will be the very first pieces of legislation that we introduce when the House returns. The first element of our plan is to deliver relief to millions of Canadians by doubling the GST tax credit for 6 months. This will provide hundreds of dollars of support to Canadians, including half of all families and more than half of all seniors in the country. For example, parents with 2 kids could receive up to an extra $467 this fall to help with the cost of living. Second, as promised earlier this year, we're moving forward on dental care. This is the first step outlined in the Supply and Confidence Agreement to develop a national dental care program. We aim to have that program started for those under 18, persons with disabilities, and seniors by the end of 2023, with the full program completed by 2025. Thirdly, the federal government will also provide a one-time $500 top-up to the Canada Housing Benefit Program.
Now, the federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Franco Terrazzano, says the announcement from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau about new financial help shows that the PM is not serious about making life more affordable for Canadians. Terrazzano says the rebate will not help. Instead, he says the Trudeau Liberals should just cut taxes altogether.
He announced a GST rebate for some Canadians. That is good news for some Canadians who are going to get some of their money back. But more than 2/3 of Canadians won't feel relief from this. So if the government really wants to make life more affordable for Canadians, then it should just cut out the middleman. And instead of rebates, it should just cut taxes across the board.
Terrazzano says the reason why Canadians are paying so much in taxes is that the federal government has a spending problem. The UCP will be choosing its new leader on October the 6th. Albertans will then be headed back to the polls next spring. Now, will the UCP remain in government, or will Rachel Notley and the NDP get back into power? A new poll by Leger asked Albertans if an election was held today, who would you vote for? Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson has the answer to that question.
It would be the UCP. Pretty narrow victory, sort of 40 to 44, I think, or 40 to 38% kind of vote split in there. It'd be a narrow victory, which of course is a big change from what we were looking at a year ago or 8 months ago or a year and a half ago that showed that the NDP was doing really, really quite well. You know, the UCP sort of got this bump in the polls when it was announced that Jason Kenney was going to be resigning back in May, and that only sort of seems to have continued through the summer.
Tyler Dawson will also have details on why Justice Minister Tyler Shandro is asking the head of the Alberta Human Rights Commission to step down. He'll have details coming up after Business News. Well, Alberta has declared next Monday a provincial day of mourning in recognition of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. It will not be a statutory holiday in our province, but instead, Albertans are invited to take part in an outdoor ceremony beginning at 10 a.m. at the Legislature grounds in Edmonton. Government officials are asking employers to make accommodations for employees to either attend the ceremony or otherwise mark the occasion of the Queen's funeral. Schools will also be encouraged to offer opportunities for students to take part in the day of mourning. Now, as for the City of Lethbridge, there will be a day of mourning on Monday, with City Hall being closed, as will Waste and Recycling Centre and Yard Waste sites. There's also a book residents are invited to sign to offer condolences to the royal family. You'll find it located at City Hall. And the Book of Condolences will be there until Monday, the day of the funeral. Well, we had some light shower activity in parts of southwestern Alberta today. Angela Stewart is out in the community with a sneak peek at the forecast. Angela, how long will the rain clouds be sticking around?
Well, Hal, it's going to be pretty gloomy over the next couple of days. That moisture is expected to last up until Friday. Partly cloudy conditions with a chance of rain for tonight. There's also a risk of a thunderstorm with a low of near 8 degrees. As for how the rest of the week is shaping up, I'll have all those details coming up later in the show.
Great. Thanks so much, Angela. The Lethbridge Hurricanes are set to finish the last few games of their preseason schedule this weekend. Players and coaches are gearing up for the start of the regular season, which opens on September 24th. As BCN's Micah Quinn explains now, there was a strong feeling of hope for the season for the players and coaches as they prepare for their next preseason game on Friday.
Canes players skated in unison and took in the morning practice on Wednesday at the NMAX Center. Last year, the team's season ended early in the first round of the playoffs after being swept in 4 games during their first round series against the Edmonton Oil Kings. The assistant general manager and one of the assistant coaches for the Canes, Matt Anholt, says there are some keys to success that the team is looking to implement going into the regular season.
We feel like we have a pretty strong back end, a lot of returners, a lot of high-end talent back there. We need to be a big-time difference makers back there for our team to have success. We feel like we have a pretty deep forward group, but we're going to have to score by committee.
The Canes have 2 more games on September 16th and 17th to end the preseason. After that, they will suit up for the first game of the regular season on the 24th in Medicine Hat against the Tigers, and will then travel back to Lethbridge for their first home game on the 30th to face the Tigers again. Noah Chadwick, a defenseman with the Canes, says he's excited for the new season to begin.
We want to set the tone for the regular season, and I think these next 2 games are pretty important for us, and just kind of leading into the regular season, and kind of establishing how we want to play as a team for sure.
Alex Thacker, a forward with the Canes, says there are a few teams this year that they can expect stiff competition from.
Red Deer, I think, because just we're always battling with those guys throughout the season, and then Edmonton because of what they did last year, and doesn't really sit well with us going on the first round to them. So definitely those 2 teams are our biggest rivalries, I think, this year.
The Canes will take on the Red Deer Rebels on Friday evening in preseason play, and fans are being asked to donate a new pair of socks in support of Socktember, which helps out local organizations like Grant's Closet, Lethbridge Family Services, and the YWCA. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Looking forward to seeing some Canes hockey once again this season. The Lethbridge Terry Fox Run is now just days away. Participants are ready to put on their best running shoes for a great cause. Close to 175 runners are expected to show up for the run, which will take place at the Legacy Park Picnic Shelter on September the 18th. In 1981, Terry Fox embarked on a cross-country trek to raise awareness and funding for cancer research after he had his own leg amputated due to the disease. Lorianne Johansson, the co-chair of the Run Organizing Committee, says the goal this year is to raise around $4,000.
A lot of the cash donations and the money that is donated to us as the Lethbridge Terry Fox Foundation goes to that research goal. And then some of it is also used to support the run itself. So the Terry Fox runs nationwide and internationally are a 0 budget event. Everything that we do is by donation or sponsorship or cash donation or out of the run organizers' pockets, which has happened on more than one occasion.
Around 85 cents of every dollar raised is given to the Terry Fox Foundation, which goes directly into cancer research. The foundation has raised more than $850 million and funded 1,300 innovative cancer research projects. A Toronto police officer was shot and killed in what police are calling an ambush. Officials say Constable Andrew Hong was killed in an unprovoked attack in Mississauga, Ontario. Emergency Preparedness Minister Bill Blair, who's a former Toronto police chief, says the police community is mourning the tragedy.
It's tragic. I know how difficult it is for the policing community and for the chief of police, but particularly for his family and his community. The loss of an officer in any circumstances is tragic, and these look particularly tragic, and it appears to just simply have been an ambush because he's a cop. It's a reminder, I think, of the risks that our officers face for us every single day. It's one of the risks that comes with the job of wearing that uniform and the uniform and all it symbolizes, but the job is to be out there to protect the public. And, the man was out doing his job when his life was taken. The sacrifice of that officer, his family, I think should be grieved by the entire city and will be. Quite frankly, they're very much in my thoughts and my heart today. I know what it's like for the police community all too well, unfortunately. I've talked to some friends, but I've not yet had an opportunity to speak to the chief.
Friends and community members brought tributes to the areas of a couple of fatal shootings in the GTA. Constable Hong, as you've heard, was shot and killed in Mississauga, Ontario, and Shaquille Ashraf was fatally shot at his Milton, Ontario auto shop. 3 others were also injured before Hamilton police shot and killed the suspect.
To Constable Hong's family, thoughts and prayers are with you guys, the entire police community. Thoughts and prayers are with you guys because this is really, really hard. And I can only imagine, every day things happen and the world continues to turn and we all keep moving. And I know this is a standstill for you guys. And my heart just goes out to you guys. I'm angry. I'm angry. Part of me wishes that he was still alive so that we could find out why this happens. Unfortunately, that might not ever happen, and it sucks for this officer's family. Most importantly, I'm disgusted.
I felt compelled to come to pay my respect, first of all, and to offer something in the way of condolences and sympathy to his family and to the police department, the Toronto Police Department, of course, primarily, but also the Peel Department, OPP, everybody.
The Saskatchewan Health Authority says 46 residents and 15 staff at a long-term care home in Regina have all tested positive for COVID-19. The outbreak at Extended Care Elmview was confirmed on Tuesday by the Health Authority. In a statement, officials said 46 residents tested positive during the outbreak, but there are now 33 active cases among residents. The SHA says 3 patients have died, but the exact cause of death has not yet been confirmed. So far, around 12 residents have recovered. Increasing demand for food hampers has one Manitoba organization setting new delivery records. Harvest Manitoba recently hit a new high by doling out more than 14,000 hampers in August. Last year, the group averaged around 11,000 deliveries. Vince Barletta, CEO for the organization, says inflation across the board continues to be the main reason more Manitobans are in need. He says he does not see the demand lessening anytime soon. As millions struggle to recover from the monsoons that wiped out so many villages in Pakistan, Canadians are providing life-saving emergency supplies through Samaritan's Purse. The Calgary-based Christian relief organization is shipping 4 containers of supplies to Pakistan. Now, to talk about this in more detail is Frank King, News Media Relations Manager with Samaritan's Purse, who joins us now from Calgary. Frank, what kind of aid are we talking about here?
We're talking about a whole lot of aid, Hal. We're planning on shipping we are shipping 4 containers of supplies to Pakistan, including more than 5,000 kitchen sets, 5,400 emergency water filters, and 10,000 bags of dehydrated vegetable soup mix, which is the equivalent of 1 million meal servings. So we're doing our very best, thanks to our generous Canadian donors, to help as many people in Pakistan as possible.
Now, even before the devastating flooding hit many parts of Pakistan, your group was already providing aid and planting seeds for Christ?
That is correct. Even before the flooding started, we were there and we were providing food, shelter, water, and medical care for thousands of families. And then as it became clear just the magnitude of these monsoon floods, we started to ramp up our response correspondingly.
Thanks so much, Frank. That was Frank King, News Media Relations Manager with Samaritan's Purse Canada, joining us from Calgary. You know, sometimes at church we run into troublemakers. Mark Atterbury is a Florida pastor, and he wrote a book about troublemakers in the church. Pastor Mark says many times those who appear to be causing trouble may simply be broken and hurting people, but other times they're those who have nefarious intentions.
I think it's important to realize that not every troublemaker in the church is a bad person. Not every troublemaker in the church, is trying to cause trouble. Some people who cause trouble in the church, they almost can't help it because maybe they're broken in some way. It is true that some people who are troublemakers in the church really are bad people and they are there to cause trouble, and that's their goal and that's their agenda. But I want to be clear in saying that not every person who causes trouble in the church is really a bad person. Some of them are very good people. They're trying hard, but they have some kind of personality trait or some kind of brokenness that just makes them difficult to deal with.
Make sure you catch the full interview with Pastor Mark Atterbury and BCN's Naveen Day discussing troublemakers in the church coming up later in our program. Well, there was a huge turnout of people who participated in this year's March for Life in the United Kingdom. Around 7,000 pro-life supporters took part in the lively procession, which ended in a gathering in London's Parliament Square. The theme this year was 10 million too many.
10 million too many. 10 million of our brothers and sisters who did not see birth. 10 million women who chose to have an abortion, but now who often carry the scar and pain of their choice. 10 million faces who could have smiled and shed tears, who could have brought joy and gifts to others. 10 million too many.
It's really great that there's so many young people here today on the March for Life. I mean, there was last year, but there's more this year as well. More people want to save the lives of unborn children and are realizing the horror that abortion is. And this is a killing of unborn children, 10 million in the last 55 years. And we've got to say, no, enough is enough. We need to not kill children, save lives.
10 million lives! Far too many! 10 million lives! Far too many! 10 million lives! Far too many! No exception!
There's 10 million missing from our society. And it's in the memory of these children that we march. It's in the memory of these children that we speak out.
Abortion does not survive on science or reason or logic or joy. It survives on fear. Fear and despair. And that is exactly what we can overcome with truth, with science, with reason, and ultimately with love. And we will do it by using our rights that so many have gone before us in your country and in my country and died so that we can have those rights. And we will use them, and we will use them to defend our most vulnerable citizens. And when we do that, we will have an abortion-free United Kingdom, and the world will follow.
Looked like a pretty big turnout. Well, the air quality statement from Environment Canada continued for much of southwestern Alberta today due to the wildfire smoke coming from BC and other areas. Fortunately, some rain may be on the way to clear out the air somewhat. Full weather details are coming up. The special air quality statement continued for Lethbridge and area thanks to the wildfire smoke making its way here. We've also seen some shower activity in parts of southwestern Alberta. Angela Stewart is in now with all of the weather details. Angela, how long will the much needed moisture be sticking around?
Well, Hal, it looks like that moisture will be with us until about Friday. Rain kicking in tonight, there's about a 30% chance of it. There's also a risk of a thunderstorm with a low of near 8 degrees. For Thursday, chance of rain in the early morning, clearing for the afternoon with a high of 23 degrees. Friday, cooler and wetter conditions, periods of rain throughout the day with a high of 19. Saturday, looking beautiful, a nice day to maybe do some barbecuing or even sit out on the deck, 20 degrees for the high and sunny skies. Sunday, back to the wet stuff, chance of rain and 17 degrees. Monday, cloudy conditions with a high of 14 degrees. Tuesday, a mix of sun and cloud and 14 for the high. Looking at the almanac now, the average high for this time of year is 20 degrees. The average low is 5 degrees. The record high was 32 set back in 1948, and the record low was -3 set back in 1970. The sun rose at 7:06 and set at 7:48, giving us about 12 hours and 42 minutes of daylight. Looking at some temperatures and conditions across the country now for Thursday. In Victoria, a mix of sun and cloud with some fog patches in the morning. Expect a light wind near the Juan de Fuca Strait, heading west at 40 kilometers an hour, a high of 19 degrees for the island. Vancouver, 20 degrees for the high and a mix of sun and cloud. Also do expect some hazy conditions. Mainly sunny and a high of 21 degrees in Calgary for Thursday. To Edmonton, mainly cloudy and 21 degrees. In Regina, mainly cloudy skies and a high of 16. Also, some fog patches in the morning for Saskatoon, but that fog is expected to clear out by noon, making for a mainly sunny sky and a high of 20 for Thursday. Gloomy and showers for Winnipeg and a high of 17 degrees there. Toronto, a high of 19 degrees and mainly sunny. As we look to Ottawa now, a mix of sun and cloud and a high of 17 for the day. Montreal, 17 degrees and sunny with a northwest wind at 20 kilometers an hour. To Atlantic Canada now in Fredericton, a mix of sun and cloud. Do also expect about 30-kilometer winds gusting to about 50 kilometers in the afternoon with a high of 16 degrees. Overcast skies in Halifax for Thursday, a chance of showers in the morning, and then clearing by the afternoon, 16 for the high there. Charlottetown, cloudy with winds gusting to 60 kilometers with the high reaching about 14 degrees, 22 degrees in St. John's for Thursday, along with a few showers. And Hal, that's a look at the forecast near the Galt Museum in Lethbridge.
Members of one union have rejected a tentative deal with one of the largest freight railroads in the United States. 3 other unions remain at the bargaining table. The development comes days ahead of a strike deadline that threatens to intensify snarls in the supply chain that are adding to rising inflation. Businesses and governments are bracing for the possibility of a countrywide rail strike that would paralyze shipments of everything from clothing to crude oil and cars. Manufacturing sales in Canada have moved lower for a third straight month. Stats Canada says sales were down 0.9% in July to $71.6 billion. The agency says sales were down in 12 of 21 industries it tracks, with a 9.9% decline in the primary metal industry. Sales of petroleum and coal products decreased 5.3% to $10.3 billion in July. When it came time to showcase the electric Chevy Equinox SUV, General Motors decided against doing so at the big Detroit Auto Show. Instead, it unveiled the SUV 6 days later. GM's decision symbolizes how much smaller this year's auto show will be, with fewer new models, fewer journalists, and lower attendance. Automakers are figuring out the new models can make a bigger splash when they're unveiled to a digital audience on a day where they don't have to share the spotlight with their rivals. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 80 points on the day to 19,726. The Dow was up 30 points to 31,135. The S&P 500 was up 13 points on the day to 3946. And the Nasdaq was up 86 points to 11,719. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $1.17 to 88.48 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 83 cents to 9.11 US. Gold was up 4 cents to 16.9737 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at 19.63 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.02 per bushel, barley's at $8.49, canola's at $18, and corn is at $11.63 per bushel. Live cattle were down 45 cents to $144.35. Feeder cattle were up 90 cents to $181.43, and lean hogs were down $1.05 to $94.70. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 75.97 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the Alberta government announced that there will not be a stat holiday on Monday during the Queen's funeral, but instead a provincial day of mourning. A ceremony will be held at the Edmonton Legislature grounds beginning at 10 a.m. on Monday to commemorate the event. The UCP will be choosing its new leader on October the 6th, which means Alberta will soon have a new premier. But who were the frontrunners? Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will give us his thoughts in just a moment. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. The Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization is looking for volunteers to take part in their Drive Happiness program. This program is to help seniors in our community who are facing extreme loneliness due to lack of accessible transportation. Volunteers drive clients to their medical appointments, pick up groceries, and take them to important life activities. If you're interested in this opportunity and for more information, visit lethseniors.com/volunteer drivers. Lethbridge Legal Guidance is a nonprofit society offering free legal advice to low-income Southern Albertans. It holds clinics on Tuesdays from 4 to 6 p.m. by appointment only. Some of the areas the society assists in include family, criminal, traffic, immigration, EI, and other issues. For more information, call 403-380-6338 or visit their website, lethbridgelegalguidance.ca. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
You know, many Canadians are still talking about Queen Elizabeth II and how her death impacted so many. Premier Jason Kenney was an admirer of the Queen and was expected to address the legislature this week on her death and the accession of King Charles III. To discuss this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who joins us from Edmonton. Tyler, Queen Elizabeth was last in Alberta, I believe, in 2005, visiting Jasper. She appeared to have a very strong and close connection with so many Canadians.
She did, yeah. I think of my late grandmother and the admiration that she had for the Queen. I think there's very much a certain generation of Canadians that feel, this really, really close connection with the monarchy. And of course, the funeral is coming up on Monday, so eyes will be glued to that, I'm sure. I believe the Prime Minister is traveling. Probably worth noting that I don't think any of the provincial premiers are going, which of course would include Jason Kenney. Logistically speaking, that would simply not really be possible, I think. So there is that. But there's going to be a few impacts on the way our province operates. This isn't a huge political story, but it is worth keeping note of. People might be reading a news story and hear about the Court of King's Bench, for example, and think, well, what the heck is that? But of course, it was formerly the Court of Queen's Bench, and now that there's a king, that needs to change. So there's going to be some of these sort of small changes that we see in our daily lives. Funnily enough, I was wondering about this myself and took a look at the memorial page that the government of Alberta has on their website, and the QE2 highway will not be changing its name. So, that does not change, I guess, with the change in the monarch.
Yeah, and out in Southern Ontario, it's the QEW as well. I've driven that and been stuck on that for many hours and many times. Tyler, we're just a few weeks away from finding out who the new premier will be here in Alberta. The UCP will be choosing its new leader on October the 6th. Would it be safe to say that the two frontrunners right now are Travis Taves and Daniel Smith?
I think that would be accurate. It's, as I think we've talked about before, it's a little bit tough to say, and preferential sort of balloting system, you never really know where the cards could fall. But certainly a lot of the chatter has been about Daniel Smith and Travis Taves. A lot of the news coverage has been about the two of them. When we talk about big policy proposals, they seem to be the ones who people are, sort of jumping to talk about first. So I certainly think that would be the case. But a few weeks is a lifetime in politics. I mean, who knows what could happen in the intervening weeks? But I think that's very much safe to say. And Daniel Smith, for example, really drove the conversation for the first couple months of this leadership race. And some of the others are sort of trying to shoehorn their way in here and there. But I think it's pretty clear to say that they are the two front runners, and Brian Jean possibly also in that mix. It's a little bit hard to predict what the order of those three might be.
Could we potentially see any of the other candidates bowing out and maybe throwing their support behind either Smith or Taves?
It's a good question, and we haven't seen that yet, which is kind of interesting. For example, not to disparage Todd Loewen, but Todd Loewen is running sort of a similar campaign to Daniel Smith, and is proposing some of the same things, is sort of the same libertarian bent. So you could see him, for example, bowing out and endorsing Daniel Smith. You could see some of the former people who are formerly cabinet ministers with Travis Taves, Rajan Sawhney or Rebecca Schultz, perhaps they bow out and endorse him to try and give him a little bit of a boost. You could see it happen. I haven't heard any word of it, but with the news cycle where it is, I mean, I could look like a fool by the time people are listening to me say this.
Yeah, news is always changing, absolutely,
Exactly.
Tyler. Now, a new Leger poll is out, which asked Albertans, if an election was held right now, today, who would you vote for? And the winner would be?
It would be the UCP. Pretty narrow victory, sort of 40 to 44, I think, or 40 to 38% kind of vote split in there. It would be a narrow victory, which of course is a big change from what we were looking at a year ago or 8 months ago or a year and a half ago, that showed that the NDP was doing really, really quite well. The UCP sort of got this bump in the polls when it was announced that Jason Kenney was going to be resigning back in May, and that only sort of seems to have continued through the summer. Couple explanations for this. Of course, the pandemic measures being lifted certainly has made a lot of people a lot happier. And the really good economic news, frankly, the $13 billion surplus that was announced the other week, those are things that are only going to be good for an incumbent government. But you look at that polling, and then in a few weeks' time we're going to have a new premier. So hard to say where that polling might go with Danielle Smith in the Premier's chair, or Travis Taves, or Brian Jean, or Leela here. You never really know.
And how that Premier is going to resonate with a lot of Albertans, depending upon what side of the fence you stand right now. Now, the UCP leadership hopefuls are now discussing another major reform, and that is overhauling Alberta's health services. Danielle Smith says she wants to fire the AHS board and decentralize control of the province's healthcare system.
Yeah, and I believe that's echoed by Travis Taves as well, who's talked about giving, I think, $50 million to sort of rural medical centers and reforming some of the billing for people in more remote areas. Brian Jean has talked about changing the role of the chief medical officer of health to make it sort of less powerful, I think, more accountable. So this is a topic of conversation very much at the moment, and it's kind of interesting, I would say, because we've sort of been through this before, right? We've gone through a decentralization and a re-centralization, for example, of AHS. They talk about what to do about rural healthcare and rural medicine has been going on for a considerable amount of time. The question I think that is going to become one for voters in the year ahead, is to what extent is there meat on the bones of these promises? How much are these things actually resonating with people? But it is interesting, a little bit of a new front in things we're talking about here, not just the autonomy question. And some experts pointing out in news stories this week that, sort of caught my eye, that there's been quite a bit of talk, when I mentioned the chief medical officer of health thing, the accountability stuff, there's a lot of discussion about COVID and the pandemic and sort of the power of public health, and a little bit less conversation, I think, would be fair to say, about some of the nuts and bolts issues. How are you going to get more doctors to Grand Prairie or Peace River or Beaver Lodge or something like that? So it'll be interesting to see how that conversation evolves in the weeks ahead.
Tyler, the National Police Federation, the RCMP union, is pushing to keep the RCMP right here in Alberta. No provincial police force, but the RCMP. And it's an idea that's apparently resonating with some of the UCP leadership hopefuls.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. We've talked about it before, that the Kenney government has sort of been studying this and pushing this, and it hasn't resulted in a clean break with some of the leadership hopefuls. Danielle Smith is in favor of it. Travis Taves is in favor of it. Brian Jean is sort of in favor of it. Some of the other candidates are not, but it is being picked up and discussed. So what this sort of sets up is a little bit of a confrontation should one of these pro-Alberta provincial police force candidates become the premier, because the National Police Federation has, I believe it's 92 signatories now of this sort of call to action, open letter kind of thing, saying to keep the RCMP in Alberta. And many of them are sort of small town municipalities and rural areas that are currently served by the RCMP. And even if they are the ones feeling some of the issues with response time and rural crime and things like that, they are leery of bringing in a new provincial police force. So obviously this is a sort of change that wouldn't greatly affect Edmonton and Calgary, which have their own police forces, Lethbridge as well, Medicine Hat. So it's really interesting that you see this government studying this and talking about this thing that doesn't seem to be that popular, and you have these leadership candidates sort of doing the same thing. So it's going to set up a really interesting political dynamic when a new premier comes in, if that promise is sort of kept in the bag or becomes an election issue in several months' time.
Justice Minister Tyler Shandro has asked the head of the Alberta Human Rights Commission to step down. Colin May has only been in the role for a couple of months now, Tyler, but has been dogged by some controversy.
Yes. So back in 2009, he wrote a book review of a book called Islamic Imperialism, written by, I believe, an Israeli academic. And in it, sort of endorsed the views of the book to some extent, and had sort of used terms that critics have now said are Islamophobic. And so this sort of controversy came out a month or two ago now, and he's sort of been, as you said, dogged by these controversies. And he had, according to news reports this week, had agreed to sit down with some Muslim organizations to learn more about the faith and things like that. It now appears that those meetings haven't happened. And, it's a little bit hard to say what's gone on behind the closed doors in conversations between Tyler Shandro and Colin May, but it did sort of culminate this week in a request that he resign. So just, a little bit of summer drama there for the Alberta Human Rights Commission, I would say.
Lethbridge West MLA and my MLA, Shanna Phillips, announced that she will be running again here in the Windy City. But a couple of other prominent MLAs will not be returning to the ledge, including Doug Schweitzer and Darren Billis. Tyler, how will this really impact the UCP as we move forward to the next year's provincial election?
Well, it's a bit tricky to say, but I always think it's worthwhile keeping an eye on who is moving where, who's sticking around, because it does perhaps tell us a little bit about where they think the party is going. Doug Schweitzer, fairly middle of the road conservative here, just recently got a job with, I think, Denton's actually, moving on to the private sector. So what are the reasons why he left? Maybe was he uncomfortable about where the party might go? This is sort of the speculation that reporters and pundits like to do when they look at these things. But Darren Billis leaving, for example, is if the NDP wins the next government, he was a minister in Rachel Notley's cabinet. Who's going to fill those shoes? So it does provide a little bit of sort of fun speculation, let's say, about what a party might do in power, where that party might be going. And I mean, it's no surprise, I don't think, that Shannon Phillips is going to run again, relatively prominent member of Rachel Notley's team, and that sort of thing. But there's going to be more of this, I guess, is the point. As we come up on the election, there's going to be more people who are running again. There's probably going to be some controversy with candidates trying to shoehorn their way in or trying to oust current candidates in nomination battles, or current MLAs in nomination battles, I should say. So it's worth keeping an eye on, even if it's not, explosively sort of front page news.
I put up my feelers here in Lethbridge about potential star candidates to run up against Shanna Phillips for the next provincial election, representing the UCP for Lethbridge West, but I've come up empty so far. Have you heard anything where you are?
There hasn't been a whole lot of chatter that I've heard about who some of these star candidates might be. And, you have to think that both sides are looking for some of these people. And you also have to think that anyone who is considering being a star candidate, especially for the UCP, is maybe waiting to see where the leadership sort of falls. Right. You might, if you're a prominent, Travis Taves supporter or something like that, you're probably not going to want to run under Danielle Smith's leadership and vice versa. So we might see a little bit more of that in sort of the weeks and months ahead here.
We've chatted with Drew Barnes a number of times on our show on Bridge City News, the MLA, independent MLA from Cypress Medicine Hat, and asked him specifically, would you be interested in rejoining the caucus with the UCP, depending upon the new leader? And he was open to the idea. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting because that actually came up in the final UCP leadership debate a couple of weeks ago. And for the life of me, I can't remember who exactly said it, but there was some discussion, some call to allow these MLAs to sort of rejoin the UCP caucus. So we'd have Drew Barnes and Todd Lowen as well. And Pat Wren had been kicked out, but I think he'd been let back in. So I believe it's maybe just the two of them at the moment. And so there was a call to sort of commit to letting these people back into caucus. So I think it's probably safe to assume that that this will happen, depending, of course, on who becomes leader. Maybe not Travis Taves, since he was part of the Kenney cabinet at the time, but I believe Brian Jean and Danielle Smith, I think, both committed to that. So I think it's entirely possible that we will see that happen.
And as a candidate too, I think it gives you a lot more clout if you have a party backing you heading into the next provincial election instead of just being an independent. Now, Tyler, normally you and I talk mainly about provincial stories, but let's chit-chat a bit about Pierre Poilievre, crowned the new leader of the CPC, and the potential autonomy if he became Prime Minister, and if the UCP remains in power here in Alberta next year. That could potentially be good in Alberta, particularly for our energy and agriculture sectors.
Yeah, and the thing that is sort of on my mind in terms of Alberta-Ottawa relations, I guess you could say, is to what extent does this autonomy stuff survive if a Trudeau isn't the Prime Minister? And actually, I put the question to Brian Jean after the leadership debate. I said, look, you've talked about reopening the Constitution, renegotiating equalization, those sorts of things. Does this promise still stand if it's Prime Minister Pierre Poilievre in a couple years? And he said it does. He said that this needs to be done regardless of who is in power. So I thought that was quite interesting. The other thing you have to wonder is if that causes some problems for Pierre Poilievre federally. Do the federal Liberals say, this Alberta sort of conservative sovereignty movement, is Pierre endorsing this, blah, blah, blah. It maybe opens up a line of attack on him. So I think I'm going to be keeping quite a close eye on that, because there's the grassroots sort of alienation that is in a not inconsequential part, I think, because of Justin Trudeau being prime minister. And does that change if he is no longer prime minister? And for the political side of it, the politicians in the legislature, are they still able to gin up as much support if Justin Trudeau isn't in the prime minister's office? So there's some interesting dynamics there, I think, that I'm going to be keeping an eye on for sure, because I think it's just a fascinating state of affairs. And I know I'm rambling on here, but of course, Pierre Poilievre didn't endorse or hasn't endorsed anyone in the leadership race. So he's actually kind of been staying out of it, which is just sort of a notable point so far.
You know, it's interesting too, let's say if Trudeau were to step down and let's say Francois-Philippe Champagne were to take over as Liberal leader and then Prime Minister, and he's very much pro-trade and pro-business, so that might help Alberta as well. So remains to see what's going to happen. It should be very interesting.
And who knows, it could be Chrystia Freeland, you know, raised in the same area as Rachel Notley and, funnily enough, Jordan Peterson. So who knows?
He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Thanks for joining us today from Edmonton.
Always a pleasure, Hal.
Most of us are aware that every church is imperfect and has its own share of difficulties. But should we perhaps pay special attention to those who regularly cause problems in a church? Today's guest will address this issue with us. Joining me from Central Florida is Pastor Mark Atterbury. He is the author of Troublemakers in the Church, Dealing with the Difficult, the Dangerous, and the Deadly. Pastor Mark, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you, Naveen. It's good to be with you.
Now, you write about troublemakers in the church. What do you define as a troublemaker?
Well, I think that's really the key question, because it takes more than just an imperfection or a weakness to make you a troublesome person. If that were the case, we'd all be troublesome people, right? Because we all have imperfections and weaknesses. When you get into a church, a person really doesn't become a troublemaker until their imperfections and weaknesses start hindering the ministry in some way. And I think it's important to realize that not every troublemaker in the church is a bad person. Not every troublemaker in the church, is trying to cause trouble. Some people who cause trouble in the church, they almost can't help it because maybe they're broken in some way. Something has happened to them in the past that has shaped their thinking in an unhealthy way, and that comes out in their relationships, and you experience difficulty and conflict in the church. Now, it is true that some people who are troublemakers in the church really are bad people, and they are there to cause trouble, and that's their goal and that's their agenda. But I want to be clear in saying that not every person who causes trouble in the church is really a bad person. Some of them are very good people. They're trying hard, but they have some kind of personality trait or some kind of brokenness that just makes them difficult to deal with.
Okay. And now in your book that you describe 25 types of troublemakers. And so why do you think liars are the worst kind?
Yeah, let me say something about that 25, because that's, when I wrote this book, I knew it was going to be a little heavy. When you're talking about problems and difficulties in the church, that's a heavy topic. And so I wanted to find a way to make it kind of fun. And so I decided to rank the 25 most difficult people that you'll typically meet in church, from 25 all the way down to number 1. Now, in most football rankings or basketball rankings, you want to be number 1. But on this list, you don't want to be number 1, because that means you're the worst person of all the troublemakers. And I did choose the liar to be the worst. Now, it was a hard choice because there are quite a few really dark and difficult people that you have to deal with in church. But what I thought was, Jesus said the truth will set you free. And if we flip that over, it kind of implies that darkness and lying and that kind of thing will enslave you and will put you in bondage. And when I thought back to the very beginning of time, to the Garden of Eden, for example, God created this perfect Eden, this perfect environment. He made 2 people, Adam and Eve, and he put them there, and everything was just wonderful. Everything was perfect. And Satan is sitting back thinking, okay, I want to corrupt this. I want to ruin this. I want to spoil this perfect environment, this Garden of Eden. And so, what tool did he choose to do that? He chose the lie. I think he pulled the biggest stick out of his bag and he went to work and he chose the lie. He told Eve that if she would just eat that fruit, she would be like God. She would know what God knows. And so he used the lie at the very beginning of time to corrupt, God's will. And I believe it's been doing the same thing all these years, all these generations, all these millenniums. I just think there's nothing worse than a lie. In a church, I was a pastor for 46 years. And what I found was if people will just be honest and tell the truth, you can work through any problem. But if people are going to lie, if people are going to be dishonest, if people are going to hide the truth or twist the truth or shade the truth, then you're going to have problems. And that's why I gave the liar the distinction of being the biggest troublemaker of them all.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, you mentioned that you've been a pastor for 46 years. Now, in your decades of being a pastor, have you come across all of these 24 different types of troublemakers at one time or another?
I came across them all at least 100 times in 46 years. Here's the thing. We open our front doors of our church on Sunday morning. We unlock them, we open them up, and we say, whosoever will may come. We invite everybody to come to church. Well, if you invite everybody and you don't have a screening process, you're going to get all kinds of people coming through that door. Inevitably, you're going to get some people who are difficult. There's no way to avoid it. It's impossible to keep difficult people out of your church. And that's why I felt this book was needed, because you're going to face these people, but a lot of church leaders, even a lot of pastors with certain types of these folks, they don't know what to do with. They don't know how to handle them. But more importantly, the book talks about how you can be ready for them when they walk through the door by creating a healthy church culture. And if you have a healthy church culture, it will inhibit troublemakers from being able to get a foothold. And that really is one of the main purposes of the book.
Now, number 24 on your list of troublemakers is the church hopper. Can you just explain to us what a church hopper is and what exactly makes them a problem?
Okay, a church hopper is the guy and his wife, maybe a family. They walk through the door. They're all smiles. They look great. They shake your hand. They say, "Oh, we're so glad to be here at your church. We have heard good things about your church. We're so happy to be here." And you think, as the pastor, you think, "Wow, this is a great family. We're so happy to have them." But about 9 to 12 months later, they're starting to find things about the church they don't like. And they're starting to complain a little bit. And so at about the 1.5 to 2 year mark, they come to you as the pastor and they say, "Sorry, we're not happy at this church. We're going to try the church on the other side of town." And so they hop from your church over to the other church. Now, the same process will happen at that church. They'll be there about 1.5 to 2 years, and then they'll grow disgruntled, and then they'll jump to another church. And Naveen, I want to tell you something, and this is absolutely the truth. It's going to sound like I'm making it up, but it's the absolute truth. In 46 years, I have known Christians, church people, who have been members of every church in the town where they live.
Wow.
They've jumped from one to the other over the years. They've been members of every church in town, and now they're going to church in the next town over, 15 miles away, because they've run out of churches in the town where they live.
Wow.
And so this is the church hopper. They're never happy in a single church. They have to hop from one to the other. And what makes them a problem is the second half of their tour in that church, the second half of their time there, they're complaining. They're griping about this. And what they're doing is they're coming up with justifications for them to have to leave and go somewhere else. And so that's the church hopper. And they get on your nerves if you're a pastor, let me tell you.
Well, thank you for explaining church hopper, because when I think of the word church hopper, I think of someone who's either new to a city or new to church, and it takes a while to get plugged in and find a church that's right for you. And so you may go from church to church, but you're saying, like, when you're talking about like the troublemaker type of church hopper, they go for a while and they find problems, and then they move to church to church to church, and it can actually be quite toxic, right?
Yes, they seem to be looking for the perfect church, which doesn't exist. And it takes them about a year or so to start seeing the problems that they don't like. And so now they've got to go somewhere else. But they're very difficult people, really.
I guess churches aren't perfect because we lack perfect people in this world.
Exactly. You know, the thing about the church is the imperfection of it and the imperfection of the people can be a wonderful thing because it levels the playing field. You know, we're all broken in some way. We all have issues. We all have problems. And the church is one place you can go and be accepted as an imperfect person. And, you know, a church is supposed to be a place of grace and forgiveness. And so that fact that we're all broken and we all have imperfections, it kind of just brings us together in some ways, except that there are a few of those people who are broken in what I would call malicious ways, and they actually are there to do damage.
Now, when you get plugged into a church, often if you have a talent, say like the ability to sing or play an instrument, church can often give you a platform for that. Tell me, why do you prefer people with mediocre talent serving in church over big talented people with egos?
Well, yeah, that's a big problem. It doesn't seem like it would be. It's kind of counterintuitive because you think, boy, we want people with big talents. But big talented people often, not always, but often bring along big egos. And so the big talented vocalist in your church, if she or he has a big ego, then they get upset if they don't get the solo at the Christmas Eve service, or if they don't get the lead role in the musical, you know, and so they start griping and complaining, and again, they're just difficult to deal with. They're not necessarily the kind of people who are going to destroy the church, but they're difficult and they add stress to the situation, and they make the church staff frustrated by their attitudes. And so, yeah, I would rather have people with mediocre talent, but who are truly humble and there just to serve, as to have huge talent people who are also going to bring huge egos with them.
I remember one church that I was attending. There were some people that were really well known in the community. Some of them were lawyers, and they were out in the parking lot, like ushering parking cars. And I just thought that is like just such a servant attitude right there.
Absolutely, that's what you want right there. When you get that, you've got something great.
Now, you say that we often make excuses for the troublemakers in our churches. Can you explain that a little more?
Sure. Yeah, we make excuses for them so we don't have to deal with them. You know, because these people need to be lovingly confronted. And when they're causing problems, they need to be talked to. But if you're in a leadership role and it's your responsibility to be the one to talk to them, you can easily say, well, you know, that's just their personality. There's no reason to make a big deal out of this. There's no reason to confront them because that's just the way they are. And I've been in churches where that was the approach. And so what happens? Well, that troublemaker just continues to do their thing, sometimes for years and years and years, because people who should be confronting them are just making excuses for them to avoid that confrontation, which means that if you're in a church, you need leaders who aren't afraid to confront. You know, a lot of people hate confrontation and they'll shy away from it and they'll steer away from it at every opportunity. But a church needs leaders who are not afraid to confront.
And then on this topic of confrontation here, are there situations, or do you think that in some cases that their troublemakers should actually be kicked out of the church?
Yes, in the back of the book, the last quarter of the book, I talk about that. And and what to do when you have a troublemaker who is really wrecking the church and just will not repent, will not change, will not stop. And fortunately, Jesus gives a plan of action for that situation. And so I outlined that in the book. But the answer is absolutely yes. There comes a time when people need to be escorted out of the church for the sake of the health of the body of Christ.
Now, what do you hope that young leaders and followers will take away from reading your book?
Well, it really has two purposes. One is to kind of be a mirror because, we might all have some of these traits in us and not realize it. I got an email from one lady. I cracked up. This lady wrote me an email. She started reading the book and she wrote me an email and said, I'm down. I started at 25 and I'm down to number 12. And so far I've seen myself in 6 of the troublemakers. And so, but I felt good about that because that's part of the purpose of the book is to help people see themselves and see qualities in themselves that maybe they have not seen in the past. And then the other purpose of the book is to be a handbook for church leaders. Like, what do you do with this person when he shows up in your church and starts causing trouble? In each case, in each troublemaker of the 25, I try to give a couple of suggestions on what you can do to deal with these people.
Well, thank you so much for writing this book, Pastor Mark, about troublemakers in the church. I'm sure we can see a bit of all of us in all those 25 different types.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Mark Attenberry is the author of Troublemakers in the Church, Dealing with the Difficult, the Dangerous, and the Deadly. I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.